I'd like to introduce our speaker today. James Scott is a native of Portland, Oregon. He has been with the Sacramento Public Library since 2000, and most of that time he's been an archivist in the agency's Special Collections and Archives. James is really a longtime friend of Renaissance Society. He gave 2 wonderful presentations last summer, and the audiences were just absolutely thrilled. So we're so happy to have him back. James is a graduate of Marquette University, and he has 2 master's degrees in information science and German history. Scott is also the co-author of several books on Sacramento, and so today he's going to take us into a deep dive into the Depression era in Sacramento, from Gardenland to Rotten Egg. Okay, so please join me in giving a warm welcome to James Scott.
Thank you, Deborah, and hi, everybody. It's really great to be back. So there should be 3 handouts that you've got. One is a map. The other is a list of readings, and I guess you can get both at the end of the program, but also what's happening downtown at the Central Library is we have an exhibit called The Way We Worked. We also have a speaker series that dovetails with the topic of The Way We Worked, and The Way We Work basically covers 150 years of American work behavior. And like I said, it's from the Smithsonian. It's beautiful. It's in our lobby. And it just so happens that tomorrow, a local historian named William Berg is going to be speaking on labor organizing in the Sacramento area in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So it's going to be a great talk, 1 o'clock. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Okay. So with that said, let's go back in time. You can drop a plumb line. That's the analogy I always use, a plumb line from today all the way back to the early 1850s in Sacramento. And the challenge of housing our citizens, our denizens, has always been a challenge for us. So you can look at the squatters' riots. You can go out to the B Street levee today and you can see folks struggling. But you can also look to the 1930s, late 20s, 30s. And that is really the focus of today's talk. And Hoovervilles. Raise your hand if you've heard the term Hooverville. Okay, yeah, pretty common. Or Roosevelt Roost is another term that's been thrown around. But the rough definition of a Hooverville is a Depression-era assemblage of ad hoc community launched in response to economic stress. However, we have to throw in ecological stress as well, because a big part of Western migration and the need to head west lies with the Dust Bowl, okay, in the Middle West of the United States. So we're gonna talk about that as well. So let's take our doohickey here and move ahead. Move ahead. Oh, it's not on. It's not on. All right. Okay. Oh, it is on. Okay. Try again. That works too. Okay. So. Okay. Light dimming. Okay. So who were these folks? And there are a lot of answers to that question. I should mention that the backbone to this talk and a lot of the research that I've done is a state emergency relief administration document. It's a survey of Sacramento's shantytowns, temporary villages, that was done in 1935 and published in 1936. The detail is extraordinary. and it basically covers an area known as Jaboom Street. We've all heard Jaboom Street, right? There's the Jaboom Street Bridge. And as you might guess, it's that area sort of north of B Street, but south of what would have been the incorporated city of North Sacramento, right? So known as no man's land, and no doubt pulled from the Great War and used during that interwar period. So the Sarah Report. Now, basically, we're looking at most folks coming from the Middle West. So that's North Dakota all the way down to Texas, Kansas, over to Utah. And so we're looking at factors such as, like I said, the Dust Bowl. So in 1932, 1936, 1941, those are the major flashpoints for the Dust Bowl taking place in the United States. And so we're going to scoot along here, and we're going to take a look at just basic causes of migration. And a lot of you have probably seen the Ken Burns production on the Dust Bowl. And so this might be a review for you, but the first factor is land use in the Middle West. So it's too many people for too little land, and traditional Anglo-American farming techniques being used pretty liberally. And it tore away this ancient primeval topsoil, right, that was held together by these grasses that we associate with the Great Plains. So land use was a huge, huge factor. Eventually, we have the Soil Conservation Service that was introduced during the FDR administration that made a huge, huge difference in restoring a lot of this land to its original state. Next factor, drought, right? So recent studies have looked at weather, have looked at meteorology, and the fading of the jet stream in the Atlantic that would push a low pressure system across the sun belt, or the sunshine belt, basically everything below the 40th parallel, that created rain over what we would consider the Dust Bowl, the Middle West today. So a disruption in that jet stream made it such that during the 20s and 30s and into the 40s, that whole sort of traditional cycle of rain was fettered. So that's just another factor. Automation. So 2.0. So automation 1.0 would be the Industrial Revolution, but automation 2.0 refers to tractors being introduced. So mechanized agriculture. Basically between 1930 and 1937, we see about a 90% increase in the purchase of tractors. And so the term tractored out was born during that time. So a landowner trying to tend crops could hire one person one day for $1.35, whereas before that same person would have to hire hundreds of folks to go ahead and do the same work in a single day. So tractored out, a real factor. Oh, let me go back. Sorry. And then general economic malaise, right? So the Great Depression. So 1/3 of American banks closed. I'm not going to get into the weeds with the factors creating the Great Depression. I would recommend reading this book, Why the New Deal Matters. Has anyone heard this title before? Okay. So Eric Roshway is Distinguished Professor of History at UC Davis. He's an FDR scholar. He's a 1930s scholar. He just spoke at Central Library last Saturday, gave a Boffo performance, just outstanding speaker. And he really spells out in the first stages of the book these factors leading to the Great Depression. And it's really up to date scholarship, contraction of the money supply, underconsumption being big factors. The Hoover administration really sticking to the gold standard was another factor. In fact, once Roosevelt took the US off the gold standard, there was an almost instant stimulus, economic stimulus because folks wanted to spend money because they wanted to avoid inflation that they knew was coming. So all of these factors sort of led to the early hits of the Great Depression. But read Roshway. You can get it from the library. It's on Hoopla, it's on Libby, and you can check it out too. So it's a very good book. And he's a very nice man. Okay, so why California? Well, let's talk about the Sunshine Belt again. So Larry Gwynn is a military historian who coined that phrase. So everything pretty much below that 40th parallel to 37th parallel would be in the Sunshine Belt. In fact, Mather Field ended up in Sacramento because it qualified as being in that area. Very moderate weather, very pleasing. There's a reason why a lot of us live here, right? We might have come here from a different part of the country. Maybe thought we'd go back, but wait, no, it's kind of nice here. So weather is a factor, and it's a factor that I think folks who are down on their luck, having hard times, also look to when it comes to choosing a spot to live. Agricultural opportunity is another factor, right? So, gosh, in 1941, 95% of the asparagus produced in America came from the Delta. I mean, that's a dizzying number, right? And you can sort of like prorate that out to other crops when it comes to the Valley. And it's pretty legendary reputation when it comes to producing agricultural riches, all the way back to the gold rush and before that. And then a spot of last resort, right? You can only go so far, Land's End, okay? And so Steinbeck in The Red Pony uses the term westering. We go westering. We just keep going west, because if we keep going west, we're eventually going to find gold. We're going to find it, the thing that's going to bring stability to our lives. All right. And then why Sacramento? So a lot of these are pretty elementary, right? A centralized location. So, you know, back in the 1920s and 30s, we have rail established. We have roads moving east-west, north-south. We're also on rivers, right? So we have the ability, you know, River Lines is moving up and down the Sacramento River. So points of communication, and also close proximity to the Bay Area and services there. Perfect size, again, services. So Sacramento, even today, is ideal if you're having a tough time, because you can set up your tent along the American River, but you can then go ahead and get services within the city itself. So in 1935, the WPA office was at 7th and K. And what was at 7th and K back in 1935? So the post office of the federal building, right? Or the old post office. But the federal building was there. So you could leave your house at Rattlesnake and you could walk west and see if there's a job open at the WPA office. You could go to the SRA, the State Relief Agency, on 14th and H, and see if there's a job open there. So big city, good services, but not so big that you can't find a place of your own. Okay. And then agri-employment. Okay, we come back to that again. So people are qualified. So folks that are coming from the Middle West, 75% of folks living in the Jaboom Street area, about 3,000 people, they have at least 5 years of experience working in fields, working in some form of agriculture. So it's obviously a fit with the Sacramento milieu. All right. So let's take a look at this incredible map. This is an amazing map. So this is a hand-drawn map, scaled out, sort of, but this is from the Sarah report. And before you leave today, if you don't have a map already, we have some right up here. And I want you to think about the layout of Sacramento today and the struggles that a lot of our fellow citizens are going through, and sort of superimpose what you think of today onto this map. And you can see, I'm going to get where's my thing? Here it is. I'm going to laser it up here. Oh, wow. Okay. So this is Jaboom Street right here. This is the B Street levee. Okay. We have the Sacramento River running north-south, American River running east-west. And basically, the Hoovervilles in the Sacramento area are broken up into several general parts. So we've got Broderick is one area that Sarah looks at, State Emergency Relief Administration. We have Gardenland, which would be basically Natomas, right? Today, we've got Jaboom Street right over here. We've got Y Street right down here. And then we've got the Delta areas or downriver areas right here. And then within Jaboom Street, which is really the focus of this talk. Sorry, I'll try to hold this close from my mouth. But we've got Jaboom Street proper. We have Shooksville, which is another town name. We have, down here we have Rattlesnake, Rotten Egg. The city incinerator is basically Shooksville. There's also Skunk Hollow. And then Lewis's Camp, which, good, it's on there. And we'll talk a little bit more about Lewis's Camp in a second. But yeah, all of these spots are easy access to us now. We can drive by and think, my gosh, 70, 80 years ago, this is what it was like. And I've got some really interesting aerial photographs that I'm going to show you. It's hard to find too many images of Hoovervilles, but the aerial photographs that come from UCSB really provide some nice context. Okay, so this is the biggest Hooverville within Jaboom Street, and it's called Jaboom Street, okay? And this is an incredible image. We use this for a book on World War II in Sacramento that we wrote in the Sacramento room. And can anybody tell me where this is today? Does anything look familiar? Any landmarks? Somebody said PG&E power plant. Exactly. So it's the PG&E power station, which is right there. We have the water filtration plant that went in the mid-20s. And then I-5 would be running right through here today, right? So it's pretty extraordinary. A lot of this land that sat in unincorporated sections of Sacramento County were owned privately. So one owner was the Merchants Bank on Merchant Street. I guess it was California Street for a while. And then a San Franciscan named Edwina Thunt. And Edwina was fine with people living on her land. But here we are with Jaboom Street proper. And this is just another really, I think, amazing view. And the landmark here is the Jaboom Street Bridge, right? You can see it right there. And, so this is before Richards Boulevard is developed, or what would become Richards Boulevard, and the development of Burkett Richards is a cannery and a massive employer of folks who would eventually get themselves out of these tough times. But this would be looking north, right, toward the American River. So it's a pretty amazing shot. Okay, and then another shot, and you can see these images, a lot of them come from the Bancroft. And these images are on Calisphere, which is sort of the graphical sort of digital collections of, University of California system, but it also harvests content from repositories all over the state of California, including us. In fact, all of our digitized items are on Calisphere. So if you wanted to see more images of Sacramento's Hoovervilles, you can go to Calisphere and find them there. So my guess is that this would sort of push us up against the levee along the Sacramento River. So we're looking west, and then this is south, I think. Not sure. Okay. And then this is the city incinerator. Incinerator. Did you all know that we had a city incinerator at one time? So it was burning 100 tons of stuff every single day. And its run was between 1925 and 1930. And it was a symbol of modernity, right? We could just, in the 1920s, World War I has just ended. Clyde Seavey becomes city manager. He wants to make Sacramento more efficient, more scientific, make life better for everybody. And this was the big win. One of the big wins during that period was the city incinerator. But of course, I don't know if we didn't have that much of an understanding of what came out the top and then actually landed. And one of the first Hoovervilles I'm going to talk about is Shooksville. And Shooksville would have been situated in this area right here, which had to have been absolutely the worst spot in the city to be. And obviously there is a searing tragedy attached to that. So Shooksville was overseen by a fellow named Samuel Shooks. He was an African-American who came to Sacramento. I think I tracked him as early as 1907, being in the Sacramento area. He came west from Kentucky, and he was basically the tacit mayor of Shooksville. And Shooksville was made up primarily of minorities. A little bit about Samuel Shooks is he was a character. He was a character in a lot of different ways. And what we learn about these folks is what you can find basically digging through newspapers, right? You know, we've got great access to the Sacramento Bee. We've got great access to newspapers.com, the Sacramento Star, Sacramento's 1-cent newspaper, if you can believe that, from long, long ago. But there's a great ad in the Bee. And it's February 1931, and Samuel Shooks is offering one 4-winged duck for the price of $25. It's a natural curiosity. 7th and North B Streets, if you're interested, you can get yourself a 4-winged duck. So an interesting fellow. There are also bits and bobs written about him being a barber. In Sacramento for a while. We also know that he worked in installing carpets and also cleaning carpets around Sacramento. So this is, I believe, and again, this is from the Center for, well, different source, Center for Sacramento History, but this would have been the Shooksville area right over here. And again, through the Sacramento Bee, we have an interesting passage. And it's entitled "The Kindness of a Black War Veteran Cited." And at the time, there were a couple of different names for this area of settlements. One was the jungle, just because it was really, really overgrown. Another one, like I said earlier, was no man's land. So, kindness of Black War Veterans cited. Editor of the Bee. Sir, my work takes me hither and yon to the slums and mansions as well. The other day, it was just my pleasure to work in the jungles of the city incinerator. As I approached a shack made of tin cans, dry goods, boxes, and God knows what else, I saw a black man busily engaged with a large fan. As I neared his shack with the morning's greeting, I noticed the fan was working overtime over a little child, keeping away the bothersome flies. A little questioning, and I soon found that this poor man himself, a disabled war veteran, has taken it upon himself to be the keeper of a poor little 19-month-old orphaned Mexican girl, both parents dead and both her eyes blind with cataracts. Nothing to me has ever clutched at my heartstrings as this scene. What love there is in that poor veteran's heart to care for this poor little orphan child. Nothing to him, not even of his own kind. To me, there is a true heart. God bless him and his poor little blind charge. A.E. Silva, who was a salesman in the Sacramento area for quite a long time. So just a little bit of a window into conditions at that time at Shooksville. Now, the next spot we're going to look at is Lewis's Camp. And what makes Lewis's Camp sort of unique, as you can see, it's got the look of a settlement, Depression era settlement, but it lasted the longest. So why we see a lot of Sacramento's Hooverville communities going away in 1935, 1936, Lewis's Camp was there until 1952. So quite a while. Now, Lewis's Camp, the namesake is a fellow named Louis Scavelli. And Louis Scavelli lived in North Sacramento. He owned this land, and for a very, very reasonable price, you could pay Louis and have a little plot of land at his camp. And so it was around until 1952, in spite of flooding that was pretty common in this area, especially in 1935. And so it was there till 52, until it was condemned by the city and eventually torn down by the fire department. And we'll get some aerial views in a second of Lewis's Camp. And then this is an interesting shot right here of Lewis's Camp. And this shot was taken by Dorothea Lange. And a lot of the photos we're going to see were taken by Dorothea Lange for the Farm Security Administration, which is who she was working for. But this is Lewis's Camp, and this would be the B Street right here, B Street levee behind us. Okay. All right. So yeah, I promised you aerial views. So if you ever want to go down an amazing rabbit hole and just have yourself a great old time, just Google UCSB Frame Finder. That's all you have to do. Put in an address, could be your own home address, and what you'll see are several dots on a map. And the redder, the deeper red the dot, the older the image. I think the oldest images they've got is 1928. The newest would take us up into, I think, the 90s. But it's absolutely amazing. This is a 1937 shot of the Jaboom Street area. And you can see, go back to this thing, you can see right up here, this is where Jaboom Street would have been. And it's pretty cleared out. You can see in that image I showed you earlier, we had a settlement right here and things were cleared out. And now you can see some growth coming back in. And then the water filtration plant, SP. This is where Shooksville would be. Here's the incinerator. And then this is Lewis's Camp in 1937. And you can still see a formation of homes in this area. So pretty amazing stuff that we can actually track things over time. Now, other Hoovervilles. So as we move further east, we see both Rattlesnake, and the other settlement is Rotten Egg. This is 12th Street right here. This is 16th. This would be 20th. This would be 25th right over here. So this is going to be Rattlesnake. And Rattlesnake was land owned by the city, but it was also a Hooverville. And so with permission from the city, you could live there. It was made up mostly of older men, veterans, some ex-cons. They got by building furniture and selling it. And that area, according to the survey, was known for its ability to organize and divide labor between parties. And so very efficient. Over here, also men only. This was Rotten Egg, and Rotten Egg was known for its ability to pick walnuts and make money that way. So in Sacramento, even during the 30s, even during the tough times of the Great Depression, there were confectionaries, right? So Martha Washington was along J Street, and then the Sutter Confectionery was downtown, and so many others. But walnut meat was a big deal. And so you can make all sorts of great candy with walnut meat. And so it was just another way to go ahead and make some money. Okay. So this gives you a look at a standard hut, right? Somewhat standard hut. And let me look at this really quickly. Okay, yeah. So how do you build your own little hut, right? So it's a combination of wood, and then you've got tin, and it's about 50-50. And ask yourself, where is someone going to buy wood, actually, I should say processed wood and tin in the Sacramento area? Think of the big industries that are around. You've got canneries, you've got the American Can Company over in East Sacramento by Elvis, and they're making cans, right? So you have big sheets of tin. You've got Setzer that's making paper, that's making boxes for canneries, right? So we've got canneries, and so we've got all of these raw materials. So if you're enterprising, if you're resourceful, you can find what you need to make yourself something like this. Now, one thing I want to pivot to right now is that I want to pivot to the demographics of Sacramento's Hoovervilles. So 80% of residents are white, 16.3 are Latinx, 2.7% African American. And so there are factors of race in every aspect of the Great Depression. And even when it comes to Hooverville existences, right? And finding jobs, massive, massive impacts. I should say that World War I ends, we see the birth of the American Legion. Before that, we have the existence of the VFW, right? They may not be that way now, but back in the 20s and 30s, they had massive sway as nativist groups in the country and in Sacramento. In 1930, the American Legion, which had a massive presence in Sacramento, was censoring textbooks in schools, just all over the place, interfering in local government. In 1930, they were trying to persuade the California legislature not to let anyone but U.S. citizens work on public works projects. In 1932, the VFW was lobbying canneries in the Sacramento area to only allow whites to work in canneries. So imagine the impact that this is going to have on your ability to dig your way out of a Hooverville, right? And of course, we see this just carry on and on and on in the form of racial covenants, redlining. After World War II, we have the California Preservation Association, which is a really sanitized name for what used to be called the Anti-Japanese League. We also have the toxically named Homefront Commandos in Sacramento, totally nativist. And I cannot believe that that was a name for a group, just shocking stuff. So race is a serious, serious factor at this time, as it still is within our society. So I needed to go ahead and mention that. Last time I gave this talk, I sort of didn't really skip over that, but I didn't really go as in depth as I could have, and I got called out on it as I should have. So, so there we go, for sure. Okay, now let's talk about veterans. So 20% of those living in the Jaboom Street Hoovervilles, it's about 3,000 people, about 5,000 households. 20% have disabilities, okay? Now, a lot of those are going to be veterans from the Great War. A statistic, really important statistic that I find really surprising relates to shell shock. Now, we talk about the Great Depression, we talk about the Dust Bowl, but you've got these cross pressures in your life that you can't control. But what if you have PTSD on top of that? You've been, fighting at the Meuse-Argonne, come home, You've experienced high explosive shells, you've experienced gassing, all these other factors. It's going to have an impact on your ability to function and work, for sure. The statistic I'm trying to find here, oh yes. So according to a February 1927 survey by the War Department, half of those being serviced by the Veterans Bureau, which was a predecessor to the VA, had some sort of neuropsychological malady, which should say a lot about the impacts of PTSD during World War I. So if you were in World War I and you had been drafted, say, in September 1917, gotten overseas in June, and then engaged in battle, you probably saw about 120 days of combat. That's not even close to what our Vietnam veterans experienced, but way, way more than World War II veterans. So this is a factor I think you need to consider when you look at the condition of a lot of folks that were living in Sacramento's Hoovervilles and Hoovervilles all around the country. Okay, so let's talk about conditions. So this is another, I think, amazing shot, right, of the PG&E power station. And where do you get your water if you're living in a Hooverville? So you're going to the river, right? So 72% of those living in Jaboom Street have a spot that's at least within 100 yards of either the American River or the Sacramento River. So that's where you're getting your water, which would seemingly have some health ramifications, to say the least. Another factor would be electricity. This is a Dorothea Lange photograph, by the way. So of the 539 family dwellings in Jaboom Street, only 15 have access to electricity. Okay, so it's camping, right? I mean, it's camping, no generators. And so tough living. And then this is another shot. So this is known as the Gardenland, Hooverville, really in what's known as what would have been known as the American Township, which is basically the Natomas area. And it's another Dorothea Lange shot. So how do you make money? Again, we're cracking walnuts, right? So you can make 29 cents a day cracking walnuts. One case study is a veteran of the Great War, okay? For 24 hours a week working in a local grocery store, he's not paid in cash, but he's paid with cheese rinds, pork butts, and broken eggs. And then another realm of being able to create revenue is trying to make boxes. So damaged boxes that are typically made of wood, right? Crates. So you find those, you try to repair them, and then you try to sell them back to whatever cannery, Blue Anchor, any of the cooperatives, just to make some money. And then what about children? What about children? So an absolutely abnormal existence for kids. They're malnourished. Their clothing is completely unsuited for the life they lead. Education levels are in the dumps. Shelley Blanton Stroud, who recently finished a trilogy of books based on a young woman growing up in Rotten Egg, Sacramento Hooverville. The first book is called Copy Boy, and she does a great job digging deep and getting the details on what it's like to be a child in Sacramento's Hoovervilles. It's a terrific piece of historical fiction. I think Shelley might be a member of the Renaissance Society, not sure. But if you want just a really entertaining read that'll take you to Sacramento, take you to the Bay Area, There's mystery involved, but there's a lot of great historical detail. Copy Boy is a great book. Okay. And then what ended the Jaboom Street Hoovervilles? Basically in 1935, massive flooding took place. The county of Sacramento basically said, well, this is a violation of Code 370 of the Penal Code in the Sacramento Charter. And so we're going to get, or in the Sacramento Code. So basically they made everybody leave, more or less. The community chest was there to take about 100 families, but about 200 families were just sort of cut adrift. It's a very, very difficult time for sure. A lot of folks just went somewhere else, right? You could go downriver, you could head east to this area, Norristown, to find some place where you could find peace and quiet, survive another day. So by 1936, the Jaboom Street Hoovervilles were essentially cleared out. And this is a 1941 shot of that area, photograph we recently acquired. So you can see, got my gizmo here, you can see Jaboom Street right here, I Street Bridge, but yeah, completely different city. And of course, completely different in the sense that a lot of the WPA and New Deal projects had really sunk in, and then we were a country at war pretty soon. So, okay, and then yeah, let's talk about this. So, did the New Deal work? Did it have an impact? Most assuredly, yes. This is gross domestic product. Little hiccup here in 1938, but the WPA, the National Recovery Administration, just all of these programs had a massive impact on Sacramento. This is one project right here. Does that look familiar? Yeah, it's a camouflaged water tower. So it was camouflaged during World War II, but this would be the Alhambra Tower. Okay, with the fire training silo. And then if you want to go ahead and take a look at an awesome catalog, just one of the great places to visit on the internet, go to the Living New Deal. If you Google Living New Deal, it's going to come right up. My friend Gray Brecken, who's a retired geography professor from UC Berkeley, is kind of the engine behind the Living New Deal. So it's basically a catalog of every New Deal project, WPA project that they can find on the web. So it provides content on, you know, when something was built, photographs. It's just really outstanding. And actually Gray is in Sacramento today. He's at the Crocker. There's a New Deal exhibit, art exhibit going on. So yeah, kind of wild. Okay. So yeah, massive impact of the New Deal right here. I want to also talk about further readings here. So yeah, like I said, read Rauchway. Right here, the Sacramento Depression Settlement Survey. I have a copy. I have a PDF. So if you want, I can send it to you and you can pick it apart. It's fascinating. Kevin Starr, late great California historian, Endangered Dreams in his California Dream series. Outstanding. Rauchway, Tim Egan, Worst Hard Time, which is also available if you want to listen to the book or if you want to read it as an e-edition. It's available through the library. In the Sacramento Room, we have Golden Notes. You can take a look at Milton Reese's Hoovervilles. Another late great historian, Jim Henley, Homeless in History. And then Shelley and her book. And actually, Shelley, I think, recently retired as a writing professor here. So just a great writer and uses history so beautifully to speak about the human condition. All right, one last story, and I know sometimes I can get a little carried away with time, but I did want to talk about these three people. So Joe Manning right here, who passed away a couple of years ago, really interesting guy. Came across a collection at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and it was a collection of photographs taken of children involved in labor from 1908 to 1924, hundreds of photographs. And they absolutely grabbed his heart, and he wanted to identify every single one of those kids if he could. And so he undertook what was known as the Lewis Hine Collection Project in order to ID as many of those kids as he could. And so he did that. That's kind of his background. But he also asked a question about an image taken by Dorothea Lange of a young woman. And to try to get an answer, he reached out to two Sacramento Bee reporters right over here, Dixie Reed and Tori Masucci. And that's the image. Okay. That's Ruby. That's Ruby. And according to Dorothea Lange, if you go to the National Archives and you read the metadata that she attached to the photograph, Ruby was months from death. She had tuberculosis and she was going to die. And Joe saw this photograph and he thought, really? I don't know. I want to know more about her. I need some background on Ruby. And so, like I said, he got in touch with these Bee reporters, and Tori went ahead and did a simple search through Ancestry. What do they say? All you got to do is search, or all you got to do is just put in a name and see what happens. And so I guess she searched Rubies, and there's Ruby Nell Shepherd right there. And I'm not going to go too deep on this, but it turned out that that's Ruby. This is the 1940 census. That image was taken in 1933, 1934. So she didn't die of TB. She's alive and well, and she's working at Burkitt Richards. And by the way, this is the American River, Hooverville, Gardenland, Hooverville, where Ruby and her family had been living. And this is the Jaboom Street Bridge right here. Eventually she'd be working over here at Burkitt Richards. And there she is. That's her. She went on to live a really interesting life. She had a tough marriage, left that, met the love of her life, fellow named Pearsall. They eventually settled in the Sacramento region, then moved up to Placerville, where she spent the rest of her life very happily. So I know she also spent some time working at McClellan during World War II. So it's a great ending, and without Joe Manning, and very 40s vibe going there, right? So yeah, they're great photographs. So, all right. And then, I revisit the issue of unhoused folks in our city, right? So I took this picture in 2009 from the top of the B Street levee looking south with the Hoovervilles in mind. Nothing's changed. Well, things have changed. The issue's gotten more severe and more dire. The point in time survey for 2022 tells us that homelessness has gone up 60% since 2019. So same wine, different bottles as we move ahead. So with that said, thank you very much. This is where I work, the Sacramento room, which is the original reference room of the 1917-1918 Central Library. We have regular hours. If you're interested in getting a copy of the Sarah report, just go ahead and send me an email. And I am happy to send it to you. And I'm also happy at this point to go ahead and take questions if you have any.
Can get the lights on for us? Okay. Questions? Thank you. First of all, let's give a very, very warm round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Fascinating as always.
I don't know if you can do it, but the slide that was just before this one showed a very large, square, flat building. And
Okay.
it looks so contemporary. What would that, there, the huge one?
Oh, yeah, that's the Matsui Federal Courthouse. Yeah, and of course, now we have a new Superior Courthouse that's going up. Hi, Diane.
Hi there. The name Rotten Egg, how did that come about?
I have no idea.
it
But,
was
you know,
smell
isn't that the great thing about history? You just have to kind of maybe walk over to 20th and, you know, that SP line and just kind of think, what's going on?
Okay. Wait.
So,
Okay. Hold on, Mariel.
yeah. And, you know, I think, well, Sacramento has had different spots throughout the city to throw its refuse, right? So I know Sutter's Landing became a dump at one time, and it's kind of in that area. I don't know. Hi, Mary Ellen.
So I'm just hoping, because I've heard this 3 times before.
Yeah.
Sac State used to have a lot of encampments as well, right outside what's now Campus Commons. But you went off of one survey. Have there been very many surveys of the ones that were here and in what is River Park now?
I've not run into any, but I think the best way to get a sense of what was going on closer into this area is just take a look at the B, because the B is just, it's immense.
Right.
And with a Sacramento Public Library card, you can get full access back to 1857. And hopefully soon we're going to get the Union digitized. I don't know when
Right.
that's going to happen, but that
I-
would be my suggestion.
And can I put in a plug for 3 reporters from the Sacramento Bee? Dixie Reed, if you, with saclibrary.org, you can do it with your card.
Yeah.
Dixie Reed, in fact, we're playing Dixie Reed soon. She did some interviews of Victor Wong, Carlos Alcala, as well, and Bob Silva. If you really want to
Yeah.
get a sense of Sacramento history, those are 3 reporters
Yeah.
that you can just search for their work and find more.
Yep, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, it's amazing. I would plug a current writer for the Sacramento Bee, Graham Womack, is really making it happen. He did a great story on what was in Doco before Doco and what was redevelopment and what was Sacramento like before redevelopment. It's a completely different downtown area full of diversity, you know, these neighborhoods, you know, the Japantown and all the way down to the West End. So Graham Womack, very good.
Well, thank you so much, James. This is just enlightening and so entertaining in an odd way, but very enlightening and very useful and just great resources that you always bring for us. So